Webinars are hot. As a content marketing professional, I've produced hundreds of videos for social and traditional media platforms and currently work with one of the largest podcast networks in the country. So for me, understanding how webinars work in the B2B space is both essential to my professional development and an exciting form of content creation. According to a study commissioned by digital agency Demandwave, 41% of B2B marketers cite webinars as the best marketing tactic for driving revenue. I've set out to discuss webinars with one of the foremost experts in the field, Matt Ley, president of the Streaming Network in Toronto. Together, we've created this multi-part series of videos and podcasts, the webinar Lessons from the Front Line, or How I Learned to Live with Never Getting a Second Chance with Live Virtual Events. Welcome to the webinar, Lessons from the Front Line. With me as usual is Matthew Ley, president of the Streaming Network. Today we're going to talk about hybrid events or virtualizing a live event. So let's start by breaking down the terminology. You've got webinars, webcasts, virtual events. What's the difference? Are these things the same? Is there a difference? Is there nuance here?
There used to be. I mean, the webinar, that terminology came from web seminar, and generally it was something that traditionally software companies started doing. They would use web sharing tools to show their software, and then they decided to start doing it en masse. The webcast was a web broadcast, and the virtual event used to mean a virtualization of a conference or something. But those terminologies don't really matter. I mean, what you're looking at on the screen right here is one of our webinars, which is basically a webcast, a web broadcast. And it's the virtualization of what used to happen in person with these demand metric events. So I mean, none of them really matter, the term that we are talking about. But for the case of what we're talking here, I think we're going to use webinar generally for virtual only. And we'll use webcast or virtual event depending for what we're here to talk about today, which is this hybrid or a type of event that has both a virtual and a physical element.
Great, okay. So let's start, or go on to the second question, which is getting into the actual subject at hand, the hybrid event. Let's break that down. What is a hybrid event?
Yeah, so I briefly touched on it, but a hybrid event would be an event that has a physical audience. You got bums in seats, they're coming into a room, and you've decided that you're going to take what's going on in that room and you're going to broadcast it out or offer a virtual element. So allow those who can't be there physically to participate online.
Right. So these people are, so it's basically two events in one.
That's right.
You get your two events in one.
So you know what's interesting about that is we'll talk about it later, but it really has to be looked at as two events in one. The way you watch a hockey game at home is different than the way you enjoy a hockey game in a room. And this is a big thing that I find everyone misses. I don't want to jump the gun on that, but you're going down the right.
We will get to it, and I've got a list of questions. I definitely want to get into that. In terms of adding a virtual element to a hybrid event, does it reduce the amount of people who show up for the in-person event? I think that would obviously be a concern for somebody that we're going to do a live event. If we do the virtual aspect of it, then no one will come.
That is the first watch out that we always get, right? So people will be looking to move to virtual, but they're always hesitant. They're thinking, well, if we do this, then no one's going to come, right? It's the same reason why, back to the sports analogy, why the CFL will black out Hamilton Tiger Cat games in Hamilton. So that they want people going to the game in person, right? So they're not allowed to watch it on TSN. But the fact is that does not hold true, especially within corporate or virtual corporate events and that sort of thing. Because the people that come to the virtual event are generally a group that's what I call a secondary audience. They're not that into you yet. They didn't think that making the trip from out of province, out of country, or from down the street made sense. They didn't know enough about the event to know who else would be there or that would make enough sense for them, or they weren't able to. So you look at different people in a corporate setting. Some can easily get the time away to go to a conference or an event. Others, they got to be at their desk all day. And so you're reaching a new audience, generally not the same one. And because there's no barrier to entry in this virtual event, it's always available as a recording. And if it's not, there's something wrong with your virtual event provider, then your audience also greatly expands, meaning the number of people that access it goes up greatly.
And I guess if you're trying to play to a national audience, unless you're really giving people reasons to come, like you create a big 7-day conference, that sort of thing, then a couple of days in Toronto or in Vancouver, wherever, obviously this sort of thing makes a ton of sense.
It makes sense anyways. I mean, when we start seeing it, like a video that shows some footage from a big hybrid event that we did for a pharmaceutical company. It was a brand launch. And uniquely, this event had viewing locations in 4 different locations. I think we were in Ottawa, we were in like Calgary, nice locations. We even brought in some speakers from those locations, but there was a Toronto for English and Montreal for French. But even within those other centers, like when they picked Calgary, they isolated folks from Edmonton and from other places within Alberta. Right. They weren't all going to be able to make it into the event. So there's, in my mind, and some might say that I'm biased in this, is that you're always going to expand your reach by doing a virtual event, especially in this country of Canada. But in a global economy where you're trying to reach people all across the world, it always makes sense if you're looking to expand your audience to do it.
So in terms of you're making the choice, you're creating an event. What are sort of the parameters? Like people usually run a hybrid event because why?
Unfortunately, they start running a hybrid event usually when they start realizing that they're not going to get the bums in the seats, right? So
late in the game.
Late in the game. Yeah. That's that is a watch out. But or they're watching the trends, right? So we talked about this hybrid event, which is a big, was a big brand launch, but hybrid events don't need to be that big, right? So a place where we started to see a lot of traction was in the legal market. They would do these great seminars in their offices. They would offer wine or drinks or food or whatever it would be, and people would come in to hear the lawyers give advice on certain topics. And that was a big way that they did their marketing. And consistently, year over year, the numbers of people that would show up was dropping. People had less time. People maybe gave it less value. And so as they were seeing that they were reaching less folks, they had to, or they decided they were going to start virtualizing it or offering a webcast at the time was the expression. And it was the same issue that they face on big ones. It's like they have to reach these people who are not coming in, and they recognize they can't do it by, there's no way that they can get them into those seats.
Right.
The other reason that people do this is cost. It costs a lot of money to put on a physical event. You've got venues, you've got food and beverage, you've got all of that stuff, and your cost per head is quite high, right? Especially in major centers. Yeah. So the cost of adding a virtual element compared to that cost is quite low.
Right.
And so the fact that you can also get more people for less of a price means that your overall cost per head goes way down. And generally speaking, whatever the objective is, reaching physicians with a message or driving leads for an organization, your ROI is going to go up by adding this virtual event by the pure reason that you just have more people coming through the door.
And I guess ultimately as well, I mean, there's very few big time events now aren't hiring a video team anyway to capture these things, right?
I mean, generally speaking.
You always see there's somebody in the back of the room filming it, and they're filming it often they may not even know why they're filming it, right? A lot of these folks are filming it, we'll put it on YouTube, somebody, for posterity, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is often a good place that people start. It's not by doing a virtual event in the essence of it being live virtual, but just by taking what happened at an event and then putting it online afterwards, which is not a terrible, way to start. In fact, I found it odd, but when I went down to Webinar World the first time in San Francisco on 24's webinar conference, and it was the first time they had done it. So like every event planner, not sure what the response was going to be. And we recorded every seminar, but we did not broadcast it live. Even though we had the technology and everything like that, we wanted that first one out, was a group of people that they wanted to have that experience, and we figured we would use it later. Yeah. We knew the data, and we knew how to promote it, or they knew how to promote it, and we got 4 times the viewers. Even though it was a highly successful event, I think there were 600 customers, prospects, and webinar users at the event. We got 4 times the users on demand when we launched just a couple weeks later. And
would that bring more people? And and maybe this wasn't even data that was pulled, but did more people come the next year based on the fact that they got a chance to sample it?
The first time?
First time through a virtual means?
Yeah, so they did have a higher response the second year. It's a really successful event. And And I think part of it was that people got to see it. I think that the first time out, I don't know, I just know my own response from my customers who then were talking to me about tickets and whatnot was, I think early on, the first time people weren't sure what the value would be, they saw it. It's exactly why you do a virtual event. So people can see the quality of the content and the event that you are putting on and sort of get them out the door. So it did work. There was a study that was done a few years ago by the Virtual Edge Institute, I think they are called. I've been referencing it for a while, but it was, but basically they went through the trouble of looking at hybrid events and actually surveying the virtual attendees. And they asked the question, if there was no physical event, if there was no virtual event, would you have come in person? And something like 3% of people said yes. So 3% of people used the virtual event because they liked it more than going in person, and they didn't feel like getting there.
Right.
So that means they lost 3% of their audience, I guess, to the virtual.
Yeah, which is not huge.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
Especially when you start thinking about the virtual audience being like 4 times the size of the in-person, you're not losing a lot at all.
Yeah.
So then you look at the next question was, now that you've seen it, are you more likely to go in person next time? And 20-something% said, yeah, I want to go next year because they saw it. And I don't even know the quality of that event, if it was good content or not, but it is a great recruiting tool for next year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we touched on this a little bit, but in terms of the audience that the virtual side wants to target, can we dig into that a little bit more? What's the kind of audience, what audience profile are you looking at?
So, I mean, that depends on the event, but I always want to say that it's a secondary or hard to reach audience. Okay, so in the case of the medical brand launch, it's physicians outside of the core areas who can't make it to their standard events. That they have to go see and figure out how to pull them together. Like Timmins, Ontario, or the North, they might have to. How are they even going to get all of those doctors into one area is going to be hard, right? Because they're hours apart, the two doctors. So it's that hard to reach audience that is a thing. If you are a Canadian company that services globally, and you want to hold a user conference, or you want to do some sort of a like this event, the Connex event, like Uberflip's Canadian company, they're not just Canadian customers. Most of their customers are outside of Canada. Right. They hold it in Toronto. They're only going to have so many people that are going to show up, but they want to reach all of their audience. That's a hard to reach audience for them with this conference. The virtualization makes sense, right? So that's a secondary audience, which is due to geography and just the reality of physical events. Now, the second one is from a secondary audience perspective is maybe the influencer to the buyer, maybe a new market that you're not really in. So if you're an organization who focuses on financial analytics software, and you've got a great core of CFOs and accountants and CAs, those are your customers and those are your clients, and you're doing an event and you want them all there, you'll get them all there. Right. But then you're finding out that the operations leaders in the company are starting to use the technology. That's your new market. Right. You're not well known. You got prospects, but not a lot of customers. That audience may not be inclined to come to this they look at you as a financial services company or something like that. Right. And so now you're reaching that new audience. And sometimes that new audience is people who aren't able to go to conferences, like I said. So they're the influencers to the buyers. They're the people on the ground that are doing the thing, not the people that are buying things, right? At the On24 conference, sure, we had a good turnout. I think it was 600 or somewhere around 600 to 1,000 customers or whatever last year. But the person who runs webinars in an organization is not the VP of marketing, they're not the director of marketing. Oftentimes they're not even the manager in the department. They're a person who does webinars, and there's usually one of them. Right. And so unless that organization really understands the value of this, are they going to put them on a plane and send them to San Francisco to watch that? Probably not. Right. So this secondary audience is a group of people who simply will never go to your conference, but you want to reach them because they're important to you as an organization. And so you market to them and get them to at least participate in some way. And now, I said, I keep going back to this idea of the buyer and the marketer and all that stuff, but even to bring it down to something quite a bit smaller is, you're doing a physical event as a law firm, and you're got this prospect or this person you're trying to bring in. Well, them showing up at your law office like cheating on their girlfriend. They've got a lawyer, right? Like they get their thought leadership and stuff from them. Yeah. It's even easier for them to check you out and learn what you got to offer this way when they're not quite ready to engage with you. They don't want to walk in, shake your hand, and start getting sold or start being talked to anymore.
Even run into their actual lawyer at the conference.
Whatever, yeah. But they will log in from their computer and check out what you have to say, position yourself as a thought leader, help out the organization. So this secondary audience, you can see why it's 4x, 5x the in-person, is that you're really expanding the possibility of who you can reach.
It's secondary audiences, it's second-tier audiences, it's prospecting. There's all kinds of reasons.
All kinds, yeah.
Okay, let's run through mistakes people make, and let's break this into three. Let's talk about the location and technology as an afterthought.
Yeah.
Not giving enough time to testing and too much complexity. These are the three things we talked about earlier. So the biggest mistakes people make,
Yeah.
In terms of location and technology as an afterthought. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So because people are coming at this from a physical event planning perspective, and even if they've thought about doing a virtual element all along, is that they're always looking at the best place for the physical audience, the best experience for that physical audience, which I totally get. But that can really hinder the virtual, right? There was used to be a venue downtown Toronto called the King Eddie. And this was, I'm dating myself, but this was maybe 6-7 years ago.
Is the King Eddie not still there?
Well, it's still there, but I'm sure now they have internet.
Right.
So not only do they not have internet, like anything beyond like a dial-up or whatever. The only other option of doing video out of that location at the time was fiber, which they didn't have, or something called a microwave, where you have to point a dish out of a window and hit the CN Tower.
Right.
Well, the King Eddie cannot see the CN Tower. There's too many buildings around the King Eddie. So we had to put a dish out a window, send it down the street, and bounce it off of a truck that could see the CN Tower.
Right.
So this is someone who they've always done, I'm not going to call it names, they've always done a virtual element of their AGM because they're a Canadian company that has a massive overseas ownership structure. And they picked a venue that literally was the hardest venue in downtown Toronto to get a signal out of.
Right.
And then we're just like, you have to do it. And they had a great partner in an agency. They worked with us. Everything technically went pretty good except for, we might have talked about this before. This is the event where the truck caught fire in the middle of the event.
We did talk about this. There was another.
It had nothing to do with anything else, but you got to think about that venue. And then on that side too is that when you look to add it late in the game and it hasn't been fully vetted, is that in general we have this idea that because on our phones we can broadcast video, and because you see on CNN them pulling in Anderson Cooper from the heart of a hurricane or something, that this stuff is really easy and there's nothing that's needed to make it work, right? And so the venue's got internet, no problem. We tested it, it's fine, and not really going through the rigorous testing that is required. One time we were asked to do a political event for the Liberal Party when Jean Chrétien was popping in to help a candidate who did not win the election.
Right.
But he was giving him a boost late in the campaign, and they hired us, the party hired us to do like 5 broadcasts. Many locations had like no internet access. They were just wherever he was going to be. They said they totally understand.
Back of a train somewhere.
Wherever.
Yeah.
So the one venue that we went to, and we had no time. We were literally like, going from one venue and then getting in a car and finding out where we were going to next. So we used LTE technology, hubs, and we had bonded hub. It was pretty good. Right. Well, we got to a venue where there was one cell tower in the area. And that means that everyone else who saw Jean Chrétien show up as a surprise took video and uploaded it to their social media at the time, and that cell tower got completely bogged down, and we went from being able to broadcast down to nothing. We could not get video out of the venue. And so the technology setup of the venue, how well that venue plays with third-party vendors, a whole lot of things that go on are important. If you don't take it into consideration, at a minimum, your life's going to be not very fun during your live event, and at a maximum, you could have failure due to the venue that you select.
And likely wasting time, money, effort, all those things. All right, not giving enough time for testing. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it could be part of the last one, but it baffles me, sometimes how little time. We were involved in an event, a series of events in different locations. And we were part of a really big planning process that went months. And I remember I finally showed up like at the end. I wasn't involved in the whole thing, and we were going through the run for the days because we had to have people in all these cities. And I found out that in every city we were going to get in at 9 and we were going to be lit by 11. And I was like, whoa, we have 2 hours? They're like, well, how much more time do you need? You guys are just setting up you're setting up a small part. I'm like, well, you're right. We can do it. I go, but if something goes wrong, we have no time to do anything.
Yeah.
There's no time to fix any problem. And so when there's that focus on the physical, when there is a lack of organization between your virtual event partner and your physical event partner, there's sometimes you don't have enough time to test, other times no one cares. So they turn off, like we've been in places where we haven't gotten an audio check before an event starts because they had to turn off the mics for whatever reason and we just couldn't get anything. So we're going live with zero idea of what's going on and just expect that it's going to work. Most times it does, but you gotta give yourself that time for testing.
And when it only has to not go right once.
Right.
Right, for the people who, like, they don't care.
No,
it's worked for you every other time.
Exactly. The guy on stage, the CEO, that's everything too, right? You're talking about doing these. Like every example I've given you, the medical summit, paid doctors, the biggest in the field of depression, that one was. The law firm one, who are they? Your partners. Yeah. This event at Connex, CEOs, paid speakers, like nothing can go wrong.
Yeah.
So give a little time for testing.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and finally, too much complexity.
Can't bring this up enough. I know we brought it up before, but in this day and age where things seem so easy, we think that we can do so much, and we can, right? We with the right testing and the right venues and the right investment in technology at each, there's so much that can be done now. But once you start thinking about what's possible, you can start layering the complexities of what's going on, which can cause issues. So, especially when you combine some of these things. So not enough room for testing and complexity. The same event where we had a couple hours to go in and get set up, we were taking live video feeds from 3 separate venues into a main venue.
Right.
Right? So my fear was we got in and something wasn't where it was supposed to be, we weren't going to be able to get that feed up and running. We were in the main venue the day early. Everything was set, everything was tested, everything worked. And now 2 hours before the event, we were going crazy just trying to get feeds into it for this little hit. So complexity and venue together caused, and it wasn't perfect. The first time we did it, it wasn't perfect. The second part of the roadshow, it did, but it was not an overly great experience. So, measure complexity, the value of what you're adding in complexity. Ask your partner if there is another way of achieving the same outcome. Could we have pre-recorded those people and had them come in a different way?
Right.
Yes, that's an answer
Right.
to it. Could we have had them come in a different means and maybe use a tool that allows them to, so we can see them, upload a photo of the venue or whatever. Yes, there's other options to get that same outcome.
Right.
And you got to be risk adverse in the corporate space, making sure that you are not, again, just making it complex for the sake of it.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Starting with the technical aspects, what have you learned producing these to ensure success?
Is that early on, before you start getting into, where's the camera going to be and when am I going to be doing X, Y, or Z, you gotta understand the audience and the expectations of what's going on. And I mean that because if we find out that people are going to be, at their desks in a corporate environment, or if they're going to be at home, or they're going to be on mobile devices, the way you put together one of these things changes. So you got to get in early and understand the full idea of the event. The other thing from a technical perspective is that your virtual event provider cannot be an island unto themselves. They need to be plugged in, literally plugged in to anything that's going on in the room from an AV perspective and the venue.
Right.
When we're on site during one of these events and we are a secondary part of it, things come up and we need to have direct lines of contact to the people who can help us. And you as a customer are not that person, right? When we don't have that, we come to you and you're in the middle of doing something more important and asking who we talk to about X, Y, or Z. So getting us involved together. And that doesn't mean, tons of meetings or whatever. A quick conference call. Most of us have all worked together before. Most venues, well, in this city we know, but most virtual event companies and staging companies and venues have some aspect of a relationship. So it's a quick conference call, letting everyone know who's on board, who do we call, who do we text, how do you like to be communicated with? Great, got it, awesome. Now we're on the same page, should something go wrong. And then the last thing is making sure as a customer that you're educated on what is a problem and what is not a problem. If you've never done this before, the first time, and you are the organizer of the event, back to the BAM thing, and you'll get a friend or a colleague email you and say, I can't see the stream, or I can't see the event, or I can't access it. And your first thought is, oh my God, no one can see it.
Right, right.
Which is probably not the case. Not with us or with anyone.
But it might be the case.
But it might be the case, right? But, you know, but every time you hear something, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's not that situation. Check, and we would check as well, but make sure that you've got a line to your provider to know what's going on with it, as well as, you know, letting them handle those sorts of questions, comments, or concerns that do come in.
Right. Excellent. In terms of what you've learned from a non-technical aspect, you know, i.e. ensuring that you achieve your objectives.
Yeah.
What have you learned? What's the thing?
Yeah. Number one, I talked about it earlier. People do not consume this virtual content the same way they do in person. So structuring a virtual event to be just like the in-person is the easy way of doing it, but your virtual audience won't get as much out of it. So you want to have a lens, or you want to think about them and what their experience is going to be like. And if you make them secondary, they're going to feel secondary. So everyone in the room is asking questions and interacting with some big speaker, and then the virtual audience is not allowed to do that. Well, they feel that way. They feel that. And so you want to think about what would be a great experience for your virtual audience, and it might be slightly different than your in-person. You want to try to keep them in mind and provide them with different outlets maybe to communicate and connect. And overall, you want to make them feel like they're part of the experience. Regardless if this is an educational session, if it is a sales brand launch, if it is a marketing venture for leads, that organization, that viewer that on the outside looking in are going to feel, they're going to have a higher opinion of this event if they feel like they were part of it. If they feel like they're part of the dialogue or part of the event in general. And that, I don't care what your objective is in the outcome, is that if you can keep that in mind and you can achieve that, you're going to be very successful in whatever the virtual event is that you are putting on. And unfortunately, it's just when it's an afterthought, when it's for those people that, you know, couldn't make it in person or whatever, and you do it that way, it is rarely the case.
Right.
It's rarely the case, yeah. And like, you know, we were talking about webinars, that we've bored webinar audiences to death by just, you know, PowerPoint, 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 PowerPoint. Hey, you got questions? This has been the same thing. People have been taught that if they're coming in on the virtual audience, they're just there to get a glimpse of what's going on, and they're not expecting to be really part of it. So you do that, you're going to catch their attention and keep it longer too.
Yeah, which is great for the brand and great for the audience.
That's right.
Members. That's great. Listen, so that's our podcast, virtualizing the live event. Very, very interesting. Great, some great insights here.
Yep.
Matthew Ley, thank you once again.
Thanks, Pete.
And we'll see you again.